What's up, guys? So today I am sharing a podcast that I was on, interviewed by Steve Shaw. We dive into a lot of fun topics, some controversial topics, such as TRT clinics, Liver King, and the whole issue that happened there. Some of the new guys in the industry and the new YouTuber scene. We go into details about natural potential and some of the formulas that are out there and whether or not you can trust them and whether or not even those are attainable, and just some other fun back and forth. So here is the full interview. Hope you guys enjoy.
Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron channel, the Massive Iron podcast. Yes, I'm actually doing an episode. It's been a while. Usually whenever I book somebody, we can't sync up and I'm so darn busy, but I'm really happy to have some time today. I'm done with work early and I have Dave on from the Brains and Gains podcast. We did a podcast or video together almost 3 years ago. Time flies. And
was it that long? Wow.
Yeah, I had to look back, and I think it was pre-pandemic. So I appreciate you joining me. Before we get started, can you let everybody know your name and where they can find you on all the social media?
Yeah. So like you said, I'm Dave McConey, and I have the Brains and Gains podcast YouTube channel, also on podcast apps everywhere. My Instagram is Dave_McConey, and I've had the podcast going on. Actually, it's over 4 years now.
Now, you call it a charity-driven podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah. When I started it, I was just coming out of my residency, and I was just kind of thinking about, what I should do, because obviously I was, had everything was taking a lot of time at that point in my life. And so after residency, I had a little bit more time, and I've been involved in the fitness industry since I was 12, as far as like lifting and following everybody. So when I started the podcast, I didn't realize at the time how many podcasts existed, but I knew a lot did. And so I figured if there's not going to get any views, there might as well be a good reason to do it. And so for every episode, I donated to the charity of choice of the guest. And so that's been kind of like a nice, fun project. And thankfully, people do actually watch it. So it ended up turning into, a pretty successful, fun project. But I still do make it charity driven.
Yeah, I see your views are pretty good. Your subscribers are up to almost 10,000. It's the Brains and Gains podcast on YouTube for those keeping score at home. And it is Dr. Dave, dentist.
Right.
Yep. Every time he opens his mouth, you hear the ting and the little sparkly.
Yeah.
But how do you balance your love for lifting, bodybuilding, and all that with your work?
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's definitely a lot of work, especially the last 2 years or so, running a practice and just having the podcast and everything. I guess I just make it happen. I don't know if I have any secrets other than that. I try not to waste a lot of time. I mean, even when I was in dental school, I was focusing a lot on still lifting. I actually had a job, which very few people did at the time. I was still, and this is still while making sure I get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So I find that most people could probably do a lot more if they weren't spending the time, with either on their phone all the time or social media or whatever other things. So I just try to be efficient with it.
Yeah, people always ask me like how I manage to do, what I do. And number one, like for me, to actually work in the industry, it's just a pure joy. Like I get to get up and talk about lifting all day long. What I love is what I get to do. So, staying organized. I have a structure. I have a spreadsheet right here. I have everything I need to do, everyone I need to check in on. So my day is extremely efficient. There's no, this is the earliest I've been done on a weekday in like 3 months, and I'm going to go watch a soccer game when I'm done. My wife is gone. I'm like, man, I get 2 hours all to myself. So now, how long have you been doing the podcast? When was do you recall your first podcast or first video on YouTube?
I do. Yeah. It was in the summer of 2018. So I had just finished my residency, and it's kind of funny. I was just thinking about, what to do next. And for whatever reason, I had heard an episode of Joe Rogan actually. And the idea just kind of dawned on me of like, I never really wanted to write a book, but I kind of like getting the information out there. And I thought it was just such a cool idea to just be able to talk to people from all walks of life and, people around the world. And thankfully I have made some really awesome connections, but just the idea that you can just kind of have these free flowing ideas. So that was summer of 2018. And I definitely like a lot of things, you have an idea, you get really excited about it. And I was doing 3 podcasts a week initially, which that was definitely not sustainable.
Right.
So now I do 1 a week on average, or 1 video a week total. So, but yeah, that was it. And then my first one was, I think I set up my first one with Eric Helms and of 3DMJ, but I think the first one I actually recorded was with Mind Pump, if you know them, with I think it's Adam and Jeff, I would say. But yeah, those are the first ones.
Yeah, I don't know much about Mind Pump. I just know I get a lot of questions like, what do you think about this? And usually anytime somebody tosses me a Mind Pump question, I've never watched a second of their podcast or YouTube or whatever. No disrespect meant, but all I know is whenever I get a Mind Pump question, it's usually something zany, something that really gets the conversation stirring.
Yeah. I don't follow them much now, so I don't know what they're up to. But at the time, I just remember seeing they were a name in the industry, and I figured, all right, that'd be cool people to talk to.
So, I've been doing YouTube, 12, 13 years. You lose track after a while. And when I first started in the industry, I was writing for Critical Bench, which was like one of the big sites. And back then we had Vince Del Monte, we had Sean Nalawani. All these guys were like big ebook guys, right?
Right.
And they had all these big, huge marketing machines they were the early ends with the ebooks and the systems. And man, I'm so old. I remember stuff people, that people never talk about. But
I remember all that stuff, man. Because I was following this since 2005. So Vince Del Monte, I definitely remember him. He, I think he's still around. He just has some kind of like hokey stuff out there. Sean's still around.
Yeah. If I can share a Vince story, I mean, Vince, I've made a couple videos going after him over the years just for, a little bit wonky information, but, dry muscle or whatever, wet muscle, whatever. But there's a big market right now of these guys, and I'm not saying in a negative light. It is what it is, but guys like Vince Del Monte who are trying to coach coaches on how to get high ticket clients. So they're trying to teach people how to get like a client for $1,500 plus a month. So Vince, I kind of took a look behind the curtain and was talking to Vince a little bit, just in the business way. So it's not like kiss and tell, but I think he actually wanted to fly me to Tennessee to put me in his system. And number one, I don't do high ticket. I'm not a hit and run guy. Nothing I do is worth $1,500 a month. No disrespect. Maybe there's some coaches out there that have such an immense amount of knowledge that they're worth $1,500 a month. But his program was like $18,000. He's like, I'm going to fly you out for free. And like, well, not really if I'm paying $18,000, Vince.
Jeez. So he wanted you to pay for the program, though, to come out there.
Yeah, there's a whole growing market of these high-ticket coaches out there that are trying to coach coaches. It's like a multi-level marketing thing almost.
Right. I see that sometimes, though, and I honestly have to wonder who is paying for these things. I thought this when I first saw Greg Doucette's coaching online, and it was like, I don't know, it was like $12,000 for the year, maybe even less than that. I mean, maybe in less time than that. So more per year. And I just thought, like, how would anybody pay that? And not even like how, like logistically, I just more like why. It just doesn't make sense. Like, and actually, if you know Abel Chabai, he's been on my podcast many times, and we kind of like narrowed it down. Like the only people who would pay that would have to be very successful, very financially successful people who also have no idea about the fitness industry, meaning like it's the first person they come across. Because if you had any idea you would just know that it's not, like you said, it's just not worth that value. So it's like, sometimes I just think these people put the value, like the number up there, but nobody is actually buying it.
I've had I'm going to be honest here, and maybe you can, share any thoughts you want on this, but I coach for a living, and occasionally, like once or twice a year, you get somebody that comes to you that is a little bit not okay. What I mean is, like, they're really hot or cold. Like, there's a personality type where the person gets really hot about something. And I'm not a psychologist. I don't pretend to be, but, they're like, in the moment, they get really caught up in a certain thing or a movement, and then another month they're on to something else.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And these guys tend to basically, they'll come along and they'll just empty their pockets with everything you sell. And I'm not being disrespectful at all. I appreciate the commerce, and I appreciate the support. But what I've noticed is they tend to come along, boom, like a flash in the pan, and then you don't see them again. So I could see some of those personality types, but there's no way I would ever. I could not sleep at night. I don't know about you.
I do think people get, I think with a lot of these things, the decision is very emotional. And I don't know if you have a certain percentage, but, we were talking before about how many people would coach. How many, like on a given month, what percentage of your clients would you say are new versus this is their, second, third, fourth, fifth month with you?
I have a pretty, I don't have a lot of turnover. Everybody's going to have some turnover because there's just a certain percentage of people that, like your coaching is just the next fitness program for them.
Right.
And, and then I'll have people that want their wives to coach with me because they know me, but people that don't know me from YouTube almost always don't follow anything I ask. They just fall away because it's more of the connection of working with someone. So I only lose 1 to 2 people a week on average.
Okay.
Which sounds like a lot, but you're looking at like 5 to 7 a month. And I coach a lot. So usually it's just a rate of decay, like I'm moving country, I'm changing jobs, I lost my job, I'm out of school, or the occasional guy that's like, it's just been like a year and they just need a different, it's not you, they just need a break, because can you imagine doing my programming for a year? It can be a little bit fatiguing. You might need a break, right? So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, and like I just think for a lot of people that's good. You don't have the turnover, and I try to. It's always hard as a coach to vet out, who was just there. Like I had, I mean, I'm sure you get some of the like ridiculous requests, but after the Pete Rubish podcast, I kind of did an analysis on his blood work, and I don't know if that's why, but I had maybe 5 people reach out shortly after that asking if I could help them with steroid coaching and whatnot. And I was like, where is this coming from? And some of the posts were, one guy he said he's 6'1", 150 pounds, and he wants to put on 6 to 7 pounds of muscle, but he can't do it naturally. It would take too long. Can you help me do this with steroids? And it was just like, you see something, you think, do you think about what you're writing before you send it out? And like you said, it's not trying to be like, put any hate on anybody. It's just, I do think it's an emotional decision for a lot of people.
So, we were talking about how long my old self has been in the industry, but one of the amazing things, where I was going to go with like the Vince Del Monte, and I'm happy to see Sean Nalawani still around. I still communicate with him and we support each other, and I really like Sean. But I've seen the tides come and go. The Ask Scoobies come to prominence. And then the Jerry Wards, in the early days, he really took off. Him and Lobliner era. And now we have probably the most exciting era that I have ever seen in YouTube. And YouTube's so vast and so wide that it's hard to say this, but you have the Bald Omni. I remember him, he used to post on my videos, and he was just a guy like every other guy. We have him, and we have Geoffrey, and we have, obviously, Alpha's been around, but all these amazing voices just kind of inner working. It's really exciting to see because together, they can do a lot more. That's always been my philosophy. Together, we can do a lot more than just apart. But you've had a lot of these guys on your podcast, correct?
Yeah, I think with and like you said, it's almost like this new, I guess you could call it a new wave, but I like to see that these guys are getting attention without necessarily it's and I don't mean this in a negative way, but without some of the credentials of they haven't necessarily competed in bodybuilding. They're not just getting hype from being like a physique athlete, because I think they relate to people by being more normal, right? So back in, if you remember like the early YouTube fitness days, it was a lot of, if you just had a prep, you could get a ton of following just from that, right? I'm prepping with 3DMJ, I'm prepping with this person. You could get 10,000 subscribers just by detailing your prep. And nowadays that really wouldn't be the case. But I think guys like Jeff and Bald Omni Men and all them, it's like they just seem very normal, and that what they are achieving is what people really want more of, which is, hey, I'm a normal guy. I just want to gain muscle, look pretty good with my shirt off, but I'm not necessarily trying to compete. And same with like natural hypertrophy as well.
Yeah, it's almost like a new golden era when you have like basement bodybuilding and Alpha Destiny and GVS, very different people, but they all have great physiques and they all are solid people, just good down to earth people. Very approachable. Like Geoffrey will occasionally message me, or I can message Alpha, or I can message these guys, and they're just like normal guys. Where, when I go back to like Jerry Ward, he used to come to my office. I mean, he was like, he couldn't remember my name. You're like the Harry something, right? Yeah, you have a YouTube channel, don't you? I mean, there was a little bit of arrogance with that whole Mike Rashid, Jerry Ward, just from what I've saw, because I used to come in my office.
Yeah.
But the new guys are just much more approachable, not just for me, but for everybody.
Yeah, no, I think there was kind of like a hubris there to some degree, because I actually remember I lived near Jerry, and he kind of like back, a while ago when I was in dental school, and he kind of had a similar response to something when I had like talked to him. So, but I mean, I think also it depends on when you catch people, right? Some people, depending on the mood or, whatever.
Yeah, well, I will. I don't have anything good to say about some people, so I'll say nothing at all.
Right.
And then I want to talk about a couple things. Recently, you had a chance to talk to Pete Rubish, and Pete and I go way back. We competed at like the UPA meet, at least one UPA meet in Iowa way back when he was coached by Paul Carter at the time. We're both from Wisconsin. Pete was obviously a much bigger deadlifter than me, but I saw him talking about his 315-pound bench. And what's funny is I made a video on YouTube basically trying to help people to get the 315 and saying it's something most guys will never get to, but here's how to get to it, right? So anyway, long story short, my clip of saying most guys will never get there has just turned into like some TikTok thing where every 160-pound guy that benches 315 now does it over my voice.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
But anyway, Pete was saying he's benching 315 right now. Is that correct?
Well, the way we discussed that was that he's very open about the fact that he was enhanced and he jumped on about 20 years old. And so what I found very interesting was that he had gotten up to a 315 bench while he was natural at 20. Then when he was enhanced, he had gotten all the way up to, I want to say 485. And then maybe right around there, maybe it was 450, somewhere between that. And then when he came off, he had a huge crash and went all the way back down to 315. So it's very interesting that he basically lost everything. And now he has since worked back up. So now he's back up to 385 without being on gear. Right. So, there's probably some muscle memory there and everything. But still, to have such a massive crash is very interesting.
Yeah, I went through the same thing when I lost weight. I crashed down to 315. Food and anabolics are great for the bench, but yeah. I just found it interesting that everybody on the internet sometimes beats this drum about how easy it is to get the 315. And then you see a god, literally, I hate to be cliche, but, fall back to earth and get 315. It was just kind of an interesting story.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure.
So you're really deep into, when did you get deep into the blood work stuff?
Honestly, probably in college. I had some health scares of my own, and I'm always just been a very analytical person. So anytime I had blood work, even in like my teens, I wanted to know what every single thing on there was, even to the point that you get like a CBC done, and most people know what hematocrit and hemoglobin are, and then that's really it. But I would be looking at these things like, okay, but there's platelets, there's RDW value. Like, what are these things that nobody seems to be talking about? So I just kind of went down this rabbit hole and found things that I found very interesting. And then there's more typical blood work that people get done, obviously, like hormone panels and everything, lipid panels. And then I just think over some of the years of talking to people, both on and off gear, there were people who had a lot of questions and didn't really know what to do with it. So I kind of, I don't know if I got like a somewhat of a reputation for that, of kind of breaking that down. So I've helped people with their blood work here and there.
Gotcha. What is your whole take on the whole Natty or not scene? I mean, those types of videos. I know it's kind of a curveball question to come out of nowhere from that, but what do you think of it? I mean, back in the day, it was a natural question, because I think when in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, when bodybuilding.com had body space and stuff, it was still kind of the Wild West. People thought they could get as big as Jay Cutler if they just trained hard enough. And people were honestly asking, they were just curious. So what's your whole take? Is it kind of played out for you, or do you think it still provides value?
So it's funny, like maybe I guess it's probably close to 2 years ago now, I made a video saying that Greg Doucette is the second coming of Jason Blaha. And I don't, mean it literally. Obviously, there's plenty of differences. But what I pointed out was, if you look at Jason Blaha, and I don't have any problems with Jason, but he grew very rapidly at a time when it was not talked about as much. So people loved that this guy was talking about gear and who's natural and who's not. I mean, I came across some video that was probably about 7 years old now. And I just remembered, when I first saw that video, and it was this, he was talking about Dana Lynn Bailey and like all those people at the time. And so he pretty much skyrocketed to 100,000 followers. And then after that, it just went to nothing. He still has a following, but I'm just saying it's been a lot less. And so what I think is interesting is when there was somebody else who had obviously numerous people have done the Natty or Nots, but Greg Doucette kind of took that to that next level, where it was like, okay, here's another person who not just has an alleged background with it, like Jason Blaha, but has an actual background with it, high level powerlifter, bodybuilder. And so he can kind of talk about it. And that topic, I think, will forever be interesting to people. So, I guess it depends on what you mean by played out. Is it played out like it's overdone? Yes. Is it played out like it's not going to be successful? I would say no. I think it will continue to be successful, because people who are new to the industry always want to know. It's just like in like the tabloids or whatever, who's had plastic surgery. There's a guy I had on my podcast, a plastic surgeon, Dr. Gary Linkoff, and I told him, I said, he was at 20,000 when he came on my podcast. And I told him, if you keep doing what you're doing, you are going to blow up, because the videos were, did this person have plastic surgery? Did this person have this procedure done? People will always find that interesting because it's taboo. So that's kind of my take on it.
So I want to get into, natural potential and a few things. And I want to get in that a little bit. Because that's always, back in the day, are you familiar with Dr. Casey Butt and all of his natural potential studies? And
yes.
Okay. So I was on Casey's forum way back in the day. It was just kind of an area of interest for me, because, I wanted to know. I always want to get as big as Tom Platz. Why wasn't I? Sure. What kind of crappy training was I doing that I couldn't reach that level? I want to get in that a little bit in just a moment. But, I saw you did some Liver King stuff, and I want to get your hot take on this. I mean, the guy like train wrecks himself, right? And one of the most epic pancake flops ever in the history of the industry. And then he comes back natty and he looks the same. Right. So do you have any general thoughts on that? Just because why not? Why not talk about Liver King?
Sure. Yeah. So I didn't really make much content on him. I think I just made one little video where actually I have to say I was wrong. I thought it was going to play out like the Athlean X thing and like most things where the person just doesn't address it and then it just goes away. And I'm kind of amazed that he didn't. I don't know if he just got too much hate or whatever. I mean, the emails that came out were, I guess, kind of damning, but honestly, the guy could have just said, like, those weren't my emails. Like, how are they going to prove that maybe just they made a similar email address, or this was, just, some sort of Photoshop. Like, he could have just denied it or ignored it. So I'm actually very surprised that he didn't do that. But the second thing I said was, like, regardless, he's still going to make a ton of money. I mean, I don't watch his stuff, but I'm going on his YouTube right now, and his videos are still getting 50,000 views, 70,000 views, like all these things. So I don't think it's really going to hurt him. I think he is a personality, and so he'll still continue to make the money. As far as him being the same size, I haven't seen videos or pictures of him, but if I just kind of look at the thumbnails, it does look like he's similar size. So, and is he saying he's off everything, or is he saying he's still on TRT?
I mean, to be honest, I don't follow it closely, but I believe he is off, or saying he's off. Someone, I was scrolling through, I just randomly, like 2 weeks ago, decided to YouTube his name, just to see if there was any, because for a while everyone was making a video. Everybody in the world was talking about it. And I saw a recent video when I searched his name on YouTube, and someone showed his current physique and an Instagram post. So I went over to Instagram, and he looks the same. He just doesn't have the fake tan.
Yeah, I think he was a little bit less red. Was the main thing.
He actually looked leaner to me. So.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like you look at somebody like Pete Rubish, and when he went off, I think he told me it was like a month or two, and then everything kind of crashed. So, like, the general thing people who are enhanced will tell you is that when they are on, they will obviously have whatever size they have, and then when they will go off, and it's almost like a joke where people say, "Oh, I've been off for 2 weeks, I've been off for 4 weeks," and they feel fine. And it's like, well, yeah, because some of the stuff is probably in your system depending on what you're using. However, when it goes on to 2, 3, 4 months, if they're not losing substantial size, they're probably still on something, even if it's just like TRT. And that is something that, of one common misconception that I see nowadays is people say, oh, well, this person's got to be on, like, they'll be 30 pounds bigger than any natural ever is. And then they'll say, oh, this person's got to be on at least TRT, which is like the fact that they think that could happen with TRT is a total misunderstanding, because legitimate TRT will not add much muscle to somebody. However, it does seem that people who blasted for years and years and years are then able to back off to TRT and maintain. And I don't know if it's just because they're staying at that upper normal level where there's never a big crash. But it seems to be the case. So if he actually is the same size, I would imagine he's got to be at least on something.
Yeah, it's curious. I don't know, once a muscle cell has been, what does it add? New mitochondria or something like that? I forget. It's been so.
Yeah, like satellite cells. And even then, I've heard, I actually made a post recently. Somebody was saying that they kind of came up with this theory. And I said, I think a lot of people come up with these ideas and they don't really know what they're talking about when they try to say somebody could definitely maintain this or that. I think, and honestly, very few people would, right? There's still a lot that's not known about it.
Yeah, I think there's a chance, once a cell has been bolstered a little bit, if you, keep the muscle protein synthesis a little bit elevated, and what is it, creatine phosphate or whatever it is. I don't know the ins and outs. I've forgot more than I remember, but
yeah,
I think there's a good chance you can maintain on a lot less. Certainly not where you were. Like if one of the top level Olympians, went down, they would probably look 10 pounds bigger than you or I, which is impressive. That's a lot of mass, but they certainly wouldn't look like they do now.
No, for sure.
So yeah, you mentioned like TRT. Having these guys come in and out of my office for years, and seeing the old Florida TRT trick. Have you? What is your knowledge and experience of like these TRT clinics where you can? They're a la carte. Let's be real, and I don't think a lot of people realize this. And I'm not criticizing. I really don't care what people do. I really don't. I don't view them as threatening, but have you explored the whole TRT clinic world and the whole a la carte, get whatever you want as long as you pay for it?
Well, actually, I had a conversation with Menno Henselmans recently, and that was on TRT and, how it can and cannot be compared to being natural. And one of the things that I was telling him was, because he was trying to say, like, no, if it's TRT, you have to get a prescription and you have to do this or that. And I said, look, man, like if somebody wants TRT, at least in the US, I can't speak for other countries, it is very easy for them to get TRT. There are plenty of clinics people could go to and just honestly, sometimes not even get blood work. They can just say, well, I feel crappy, I feel tired, I have low libido, whatever. And they could get TRT. And like you said, sometimes it's a lot. I mean, I've talked to people who said they went and got a prescription for 400 milligrams of testosterone a week. Like how that's not cracked down on, I have no idea. But it's honestly not that difficult for people to do.
Yeah, I've had so many people. I mean, this is unsolicited. It's not like I'm trying to pull this information out of people, but they've sat in my office. I've sat in their presence, and they can go and tell these guys whatever they want. They can get T2. They can get as much HGH as they want. They can get any trend, DECA, whatever they want. They can get it as long as they pay for it, as long as they get their blood work once a year. And I made a video, I don't know, a couple months back about, TRT doesn't mean TRT. I know guys on TRT that, their love, what they're taking is ridiculous. So the word TRT is meaningless to me, because it's like there's such a big difference between guys that are like on real TRT, like that might provide some health benefits and maybe a 1 to 2 to maybe even a 5-pound muscle bump, if they're on like at the high end of TRT, but a big difference between them and somebody that's just using it as a sham.
Well, that's why I said, when people say like they'll see somebody who's, incredibly muscular and they'll say, oh, he's got to be on at least TRT. And it's like the fact that you're saying at least TRT, like you think that's possible, indicates that you have been tricked into thinking TRT, like legitimate TRT, is some big boost. And it's really not. I mean, if you look at the studies, people who were on 125 milligrams per week added an average of a couple kilograms of muscle, which is, substantial, but you're not talking this like game changer. And a true TRT for most people is probably going to be closer to 100 milligrams. So, it can add, if you're hypogonadal, is it going to help? Absolutely. But if you think that you're just going to go on a legitimate TRT and it's going to transform your physique, you've really been misled.
Back in, I had a lot of years where I was pretty abusive with food, binge eating. And I was pretty self-abusive, not, I just didn't take great care of myself, even though I was lifting. And around 2004, I had my blood work done, and it was just random. I was just a random physical, and I think my testosterone levels were like 187.
Wow.
And at the time, my doctor had suggested that I do a patch or something. I don't know what it is, a patch.
Okay.
And I think, if I recall, like the milligrams on those were so ridiculous, but they wanted like $400 a month. Plus you had to do blood work every month. And
yeah,
I think I was making like $14 an hour. I said, no, I'm good. Thanks. But the only point is, like, back then, it was probably like 5 milligrams a week or something, and now you got guys doing like 500 milligrams a week calling it TRT.
Yeah. And, with the patches and all that stuff, you have to factor in how it absorbs and like it's a daily dose rather than a weekly dose. But yeah, it's definitely a little silly these days.
So we were talking before we got on about the video I made with GVS and Alpha Destiny, and I said they're not special, right?
Right.
And you brought up that video, and I don't know the context, so I'm going to dive into that a little bit. Anything about that video trigger you?
I wouldn't say it triggers me. I would say we might have slightly different opinions on it, in that I think it depends. Would we say that guys like that are special in their work ethic? I would say yes, they are. I think your point was to say that that is a very achievable physique naturally with the work ethic. So I guess we should start there. Is that basically your general message, is that they have a very attainable physique?
Well, I will set the table with this. There's two basic levels to this. Number one, I think anybody has the potential to do what they do, not necessarily be clones of them, but achieve achieve something very, very dramatic to their physique. I believe people have that potential, but I believe from my experience, the number of people that have the drive and all the pieces and mechanisms to actually get to that point, they're special. They're pretty rare. I think that's a missing variable that isn't stressed enough with people that are successful. It's not just a calculus formula. It's these people are special in that kind of way. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say. I think it's a multitude of factors here. So clearly, they put a lot more effort in than the average gym goer. Obviously, right? I mean, Geoffrey is going on close to 10 years. Alpha Destiny is 13 years. I think natural hypertrophy might be close to as long as so I'm going on almost 18 years. I think he was maybe 15 years, something like that. But either way, we're talking over a decade in most of these cases. And because of that, few people are going to achieve that. I do think that inherently, if you look, honestly, even in a gym, you are going to select for slightly above average genetics compared to the general population, right? It's like if you were to just select all basketball players, they're going to have better genetics for it, because if they had horrible genetics, they would weed themselves out. Right. So if you just go to like an LA Fitness and you took 100 people, on average, they are probably going to have at least a little bit better genetics than 100 completely randomly selected people. Then you take the next level up and you look at people who are YouTubers, and frankly, quite successful YouTubers based on, yes, their content, but also their physique, their strength, whatever it may be. You are again selecting for a population that is going to have better than average genetics. And I would absolutely say somebody like Geoffrey, who has basically 18-inch arms and continues to grow and everything, and his size I don't think is attainable for many naturals. But as far as the process, I do think that most people can achieve a lot with their physique, and most people never will get to that point where they really need to focus on their genetics, because, and this is something I say on my channel, so it's like, who is the message? I would never go to the average person and start talking about how important genetics are, because that's not the message that they need to hear. If you've been doing this for 10 plus years and you look dramatically different than somebody else who's been doing it for 10 plus years, and you've both been consistent, yeah, there's probably a genetic factor there. But for the average person who's overweight, under muscled, they probably don't really need to hear the genetics part, because they might use it as an excuse.
I know my own path. Like, I remember like Paul Carter once saying like, the gym wasn't therapy. And I don't remember the exact quote. And I think it was maybe even Fazlips who says, you can't sustain rage training. Well, they've never met me. I'm not in the gym rage training every time, but like, I grew up in a very violent, very dysfunctional background. So like the gym is it's a very emotional platform for me. Like the control I feel in the gym, for better or for worse, people can psychoanalyze me and tell me all my deficiencies, but like what I do, like when I enter the gym, what I'm doing, I would never, I'm not special, right? I'm not trying to, say I'm special, but like I know where I go and what I do is borderline stupid sometimes.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I once I did a 5-hour workout streamed on like Ustream back in the day where I did 500 deadlift reps with 315. Like, there's a degree of what I do that I don't think the average person has the time, energy, or even the passion, you know, to want to do, you know.
Sure.
And like guys like GVS and Alpha, they're fun to watch, but you know, the average guy's just trying to pay his mortgage and add 10 pounds of muscle. And those guys are like next level with their passion.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know. I mean, very few people have taken it to that level where it's like, look, this is all I'm doing, and you know, even just like you said, like with what they can do. I mean, they don't have kids, they don't have a job that's like, hey, you got to be doing this thing 50 hours a week. And I'm not trying to say that the YouTube stuff is not legitimate, but it's definitely different than, hey, I got to commute to work for an hour, work 10 hours under a boss that's stressful, work, go 10 hours an hour back home. And then I got a family of 5. Like, that is very different than, hey, I'm a YouTuber and my entire life is dedicated to this thing, And I think they would probably acknowledge that, which is to say that, you could get into the conversation of, is it a true genetic max for a lot of people then? Or is it more of like a lifestyle max where maybe there's 5 to 10 pounds muscle left, but their lifestyle just prohibits that,
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it doesn't involve a lot of gym time per week. It really doesn't, but it does involve a lot of, overall energy and focus and thought during the week. Yep. I don't think I've ever trained more than 6 hours a week. But like I remember falling asleep just thinking about my next. Like, I used to fall asleep thinking about my next workout the next. Yep.
Oh yeah. That was actually a way I would like fall asleep. Is like I would actually like I went through a period where it's like, okay, let me see if visualization helps. I mean, I've tried everything under the sun, and for 6 months, I would go to sleep, or actually even before my workout, I would play the entire workout through my mind, every single set, every rep, and I can't say that it honestly did really anything for me too much, but it was something that I'm glad I at least tried, and it certainly, at least from a mindset standpoint, kind of got me focused on it. So I think that obsession is something that probably all of us in this space share, but the average person, they could just go to the gym 4 days a week or whatever it is. And like you said, time-wise in the actual gym isn't really going to be that different, but it's like, is it on your mind all the time is definitely a quality I think a lot of us have.
I want to flip the switch over to nutrition a little bit, because what could be more boring of a topic, but more important of a topic? One thing I've learned from coaching, David, I want to hear your thoughts on this in general, is like, I can get guys that will be super passionate about lifting, but to get them to just have consistent nutrition, they don't have to weigh stuff. They don't even have to count macros, but to get them to the level where to get them to weigh their body weight a couple times a week, or to have consistent nutrition, or to even, I'm eating healthy, air quotes. What are your thoughts on that? It's such a boring topic. Eat right. Yeah. But where is the disconnect for these guys that will go deep with their training, or go hard with their training, or be very passionate about the bodybuilding lifestyle, except for nutrition?
Well, I think it's exactly what we just said with the timing, right? So, there were times where it's like, okay, so this is a huge part of my life. And then I think about it, I was like, okay, but is it like from a time standpoint, there's probably soccer moms who spend more time in the gym than I do. I'm there 3-4 days a week. It's probably about 4 to 5 hours total per week. And there's plenty of people who do that. So, but somehow it's my whole life. And that comes down to, I think, again, the mindset. I'm thinking about it all the time, but then also the nutrition, right? Because I do count my macros. I actually, do you remember the days of Fit Day?
I'm not familiar with that name, no.
So Fit Day it's like the old school MyFitnessPal. And I had 15 years of data on there. And then one day they just deleted it. And
that was a nice day for you, I imagine.
Oh yeah, no, it was heartbreaking. This was only a few months ago. So if anybody wants to email them on my behalf, I just troll them until they have to get me my info back. Go ahead. But yeah, that was very upsetting, of course. And I'm very analytical and detail oriented, so I love to have that. But I tell people, like, you don't need to do all of that. But I think for people to go to the gym, for some people that's hard, but for a lot of people it's like, okay, I can just do that. But then it's like, hey, 24 hours a day, or at least all the time you're awake, you have to think about not putting this stuff in your mouth and putting this other stuff in your mouth. And it really weighs in. It's actually one of the topics I plan to talk to, kind of like those guys you were mentioning, is that some people just seem to have this dedication. You know, you could have somebody who's like a mega millionaire and they're successful in all those areas of life, but they just cannot stop eating dessert, or they cannot just do these things. And yet, and you see the other side of it too, right? You see some people with great physiques and everything who are bodybuilders and the rest of their life's a train wreck. So it's very interesting that some people have this strong discipline in one area of their life and they just can't get this other part of their life sorted out.
Yeah, I think that was kind of, I've tasted that a little bit. I have like the physical pursuits I really, really like, but when, because of my childhood, not to play the violin for me, but I have stress issues. Like, so when things enter my life and disrupt me, I tend to lose control a little bit. Like I didn't want to become an alcoholic like my father, so I would turn to food, right? Because food is safer. And I kind of got this weird stress reflex where I eat, but I don't have that area of control. Whereas with lifting, I got to do it. I got to maintain my structure, or mentally it's wrong. But it is interesting because you can be perfectly on the tracks in one area of life and still have some things you're trying to work through in others.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So I don't want to keep you on too long. We've been on for about 47 minutes, but I'd like to talk about natural potential and Dr. Casey Butt, if you don't mind. It's a passion of mine, and it's a hard topic to discuss because people can approach it emotionally or they can approach it as a limitation. Back in the day, just for people that are listening that aren't familiar, Dr. Casey Butt, I was on his forum, from a very early age. I interviewed him for Muscle and Strength. We got a two-part interview at Muscle and Strength, which is just a gold mine of information for the lifting nerds. And Casey did a study of 300 natural champions, and these are the best of the best, just genetic elites, and basically put together information where we could look at ankle size, wrist size, so on and so forth, and kind of give people a reasonable expectation of where they could get genetically. So Casey didn't do it to say, this is your limitations. He did it more to say, this is your potential. This is what you could be. And it's pretty spectacular if you think about the information that he put together, like where you could actually be, because these guys are, legends. But we're kind of, I want to get your thoughts on this, Dave. We're, there's a difference between strength and muscle. Okay. Strength is a performance-based thing. You get a bigger, like powerlifting in the last 10, 15 years, guys now are destroying what they did 10 to 15 years ago because we have a bigger data pool. And just like any sport, because you get a bigger data pool, you're going to see an increase in records and so on and so forth. But people automatically equate that as like, okay, we can do the same thing muscle-wise or from a physiological standpoint. What are your thoughts on that, just as an opening question?
So essentially the fact that we are able to be building more and more strength, but may not necessarily be building more muscle.
Yeah, like the guys now aren't any bigger than they were 60 years ago, the champions, but our strength levels right now, like, we have so many naturals just doing ridiculous things now that even 10 years ago we thought were impossible.
Okay, and we're saying specifically naturals then?
Yeah, naturals.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, if we're talking specifically naturals, I think when you look at the literature, even there is so much that works for, so if we look at just from like a training standpoint, there's so much that works for hypertrophy, right? As long as somebody has adequate volume, you can do low reps, you can do high reps, you can even stay pretty far away from failure. There's different methodologies. So I mean, and we've all probably met that natural guy who's just like a construction worker who's bigger than we are, right? It's just like something. So just overall volume seems to do a lot. Whereas if somebody is focusing on strength over years and years, I think that is something that's going to develop. And not to say that the methodologies are so dramatically different now than maybe 10 years ago, but certainly compared to, let's say, 30 or 40 years ago, there are definitely a lot of different methodologies for strength specifically that I think play into that. I also think probably the biggest thing is going to be, like you said, genetics. So the pool is bigger. So, is the average person walking around so much stronger? I would think probably not. But when you have huge social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where you are getting legitimately somebody who's 1 in 10,000 and they're posting, or 1 in 100,000 and they're posting, you're going to start seeing more of these really freaky examples where maybe in response to like what you said with the 315, maybe there is somebody out there who's 145 pounds repping 315. Doesn't mean that it's actually any more common that this person exists, but we're able to see it more,
So what are your general thoughts on Dr. Casey Butt's research and the whole genetic or natural potential concept, just in general?
I think that the general concept that as you continue to gain muscle, you are going to hit more of a ceiling, right? And you're going to hit this asymptote, and then that's going to slow down a lot, is of course sound. I think that if you're looking at the concept that people with bigger joints tend to have a greater potential for larger muscle circumferences, I think that is also in general sound. However, many people look at this as if it's like some hard limit, which is clearly not. And the unfortunate reality is a lot of people will also not ever hit those limits. So, some people look at them and say, oh, well, Casey Butt's formula says that I can have 17-inch arms at 12%, right? Well, maybe if somebody like Geoffrey, Verity, Schofield followed that, he would have gotten to 17 and been like, well, I guess that's it. And maybe he's one of those rare people that could actually have relatively lean 17 and a half or 18-inch arms. But a lot of people will never hit that. And they might think, am I doing something wrong? I'm only hitting 15 and a half. I'm only hitting 16, but this thing says I should be able to get 17, and they might stress out about that. So I don't think the specific formula is that useful. I think it's cool, like from an intellectual standpoint, it's cool that Casey Butt put together that data. But I don't think those hard numbers help too much.
Well, arm size is kind of a wild horse because you can have, different muscle belly shapes. You can have a higher peak. It can vary. Like like Mark Lobliner, I used to work with him. He had very small triceps. I have naturally big triceps, so it makes my arms, look like 19 and a half inch pumps. So
right now your arms look huge.
yeah. And really, I'm if I'm at 18%, I don't even think I'm at 17-inch arms. That's the reality people don't understand, but I have never seen anybody exceed his numbers from a weight standpoint. Like you do, Casey did, he did discuss joint size and, all this kind of stuff. And obviously that plays a factor, but I would disagree with you 100% because I've never seen anybody exceed the lean body mass potential. Even Geoffrey, Verity, Schofield, is he 5'10" or 6 foot tall?
I think he's 5'11"-ish.
So by my calculations, he was 202, and I don't know his body fat percentage, but even at 202, say he was 12%, he's still under. He's still under the projections.
What does it have for maximum arm size?
Well, you're going on arm size though, Dave, and I'm talking about lean body mass potential. I mean, arm size is going to vary, depending on the muscle bellies and that sort of thing. But the fixation on arm size doesn't do service, to actually lean body mass. And that's what I'm referencing. Like his lean body mass is under Casey's predictions. And I've never seen anybody ever exceed Casey's lean body mass projections.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, the formula, at least from what I recall, I mean, it's been years since I looked at it, but the formula, I believe, is overall, like it shows, here's your lean body mass, here's neck measurement, here's arm measurement. So to me, the formula is the whole thing comprehensively, in which case you could say, all right, well, maybe the arms don't apply, but the lean body mass does. And that's why, again, I think it's not terribly useful, because it's like, well, maybe this person beats this part of it, but this person doesn't. I tend to agree, though, with the weight aspect. And this is something that, something that kind of bothers me, especially with natural bodybuilders, is they'll say, well, your weight doesn't matter, your measurements don't matter, it's all about what you look on stage. And it's like, yeah, sure, if you really care about that one day for the little trophy that much, then fine. But in the real world, weight does matter. Like, the size is how you really look. I mean, I'm sure you've met more people from the industry than I have, and you've probably seen people who looked amazing in photos, and you meet them in person. It's like, oh, you're actually not that big, and vice versa. If somebody is like, let's say 250, they're going to be a huge human being in person, right? Like, even if they don't look that great in pictures. So again, this goes back to the average internet person versus what the real person in real life wants. And, most people don't just want to be a shredded 150 pounds. They want to actually look like they lift.
Right. Yeah. It's a very heated discussion. I get very heated discussing it, because I've never seen anybody exceed the weight standards. The arm standards, there's going to be variance, as far as arm size, and shape. Like, I have a potato shaped bicep. When my arm is at my side, it looks long and impressive. But when I flex, it looks awful. It looks absolutely awful. So, the arm size thing, to me, size is going to vary a little bit. But that's the beautiful thing about bodybuilding, is you have, different insertion points and limb lengths and different, lengths of the muscle itself. And it just looks different on each individual.
For sure.
But, my arms flex look awful, and when I have a tricep pump, they, look ridiculous. But the body weight stuff, that's the realm I live in, and I can see where people can kind of butt heads, because I don't really think. I've measured. I've measured. Not many people have had arm size bigger than me, like the Hodge twins. And again, my arms aren't even that big. When I meet somebody and their arms are bigger than mine, and mine are barely going to hold on to 17 inches lean, it's impressive. So, have you had a chance to meet many of these guys in your time in the industry, or has it just been more online? Do you go to the shows like the Arnold or anything like that?
I don't go to the shows. I've met Brian Borstein, Aaron Straker. I've met Greg Knuckles and Eric Trexler. I'm trying to think who else. Met a couple other people, Mike Israetel. It's funny, actually, because I remember Greg Knuckles saying that when you meet a lot of these naturals in person, like in pictures, they don't look that big. But then when you meet them in person, it's kind of the opposite. Like, you're like, oh, these people are really impressive. I wouldn't say I've been surprised by anybody I've met. I feel like people look pretty much exactly what I expected them to look like. I would say that the average person in the fitness industry is certainly shorter than average. And so from a general size standpoint, like overall, I guess they maybe seem smaller in that regard. But I also kind of just know how people are with pictures and everything. Like, I'm sure, like, I have some pictures that I would say look like impressive versions of me, but if you met me, it's like I'm 6'1", 195 pounds. Like, if you've seen somebody who's about 200 pounds, you kind of know what the general size is, So right. I haven't really been overly surprised when I've met any of these guys.
The only people I've been surprised by were the Hodge twins. They are tall. Like, they made me look like a dwarf.
How tall are they?
I don't know, like 6'2", 6'3", but like if you have a picture of them and then you have a picture of, like, Geoffrey, they're going to look kind of like the same physique. But then if you put them next to Geoffrey, Geoffrey's going to look like he's going to look like two sizes down.
Really? Just overall size? You mean just because their height?
Just overall size, man. They got to have 19-inch arms, and their shoulders are wide.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they're 100% built for bodybuilding. and they just look amazing in person.
Yeah, no, I mean they definitely. I haven't seen their stuff in a long time, but they always look like they had very impressive physiques.
And everybody else I've met it's just been not unimpressive, but just kind of where you would expect them to be. But those are one of the few guys that surprised me. I want to talk about let's go a little bit less heated, or maybe more heated, Dave. And
Sure.
one more topic, if you don't mind, and I'll let you go.
Yeah, sure.
Science-based pursuits. For a while, we really got deeper into the Kool-Aid with science. And then there's almost a pushback, like, science almost got lost to the art a little bit. I think it's kind of a fair statement in certain circles. And, now I think most people respect the science, but they also, like you mentioned earlier, there's so many different ways and different techniques and different approaches to building muscle that, is it fair to say, Dave, that we're kind of still in our very infancy when it comes to the science of hypertrophy?
I think yes, overall, but I also think just from a general, if you're talking about the science topic, people will kind of get into this evidence-based industry, and then they want to think that that is the only thing that matters, when the reality is, I mean, frankly, the quote-unquote evidence-based guys are really not bigger or winning more shows than the guys who are just kind of bros a lot of times. And I think that's a few reasons. One, because the stuff that has stuck around with the bros for a long time has stuck around for a reason. And yes, there's clearly some BS that's done out there. There's clearly some nonsense. There's clearly stuff that's been passed down by the guys who were enhanced, that was passed down to naturals but doesn't work as well. So that's all true. But I think a lot of the little scientific nuances are overblown. And that's really one of my issues with some of the stuff that is promoted as like, this is the way to do it, where there's almost a mindset that, wow, if somebody's not doing that, they clearly don't know what they're talking about. If somebody follows a bro split, and again, I'm not a big fan of bro splits, but there are plenty of people who have gotten really good physiques from that. And could you improve upon it? I think yes. But when you start getting into like these little nitty gritty details, people lose sight of it. And I know this is something Geoffrey and others have talked about as well, is like this overemphasis on, I need a study to even try it, is, I think, kind of like acting like we are further than we really are in understanding exactly what causes hypertrophy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there was I grew up in an era where I was used to people training hard, and just saying train hard is kind of washed a little bit, because it's we hear it so much, right? It's just like it's like you must have good nutrition. Everyone's like, okay, and they just pass it off. Move on down the line. I got to train hard. I got to have good nutrition.
Right.
But I grew up in a world where all I was surrounded with was guys that were just doing like crazy stuff. Tom Platz and even Menser, even one hit, but it was super intense, right?
Yeah.
Dorian Yates, whatever flavor. They didn't call it training hard. That was just kind of the norm. Even Arnold, even though he did more of the volume end, you watch these guys and there was just a next level of intensity. And we kind of went from that to almost a modern landscape where when you say train hard, no one understands the concept, or very few people understand the concept. Is that a fair analysis? You see things like that we almost got away from an understanding of what that is?
I think a lot of people, and I hate to say the cliche, like people just want an easy way out. I mean, obviously that does happen, but I think a lot of it is, I think it could be partly the research now that shows, like you've probably at least heard of it, like, some of the stuff showing that like 3, 4, 5 reps in reserve is just as good at building muscle. And, I think the research is fine, but I personally feel that is hard to, if you get across to people like, hey, you have to try and train really hard and be consistent, but also you can stay 5 reps away from failure. And also, if you've never really gone to failure, like you, Steve, what legitimate failure is, right? I mean, if you've been around Tom Platz and all those people, you've pushed yourself to that brink where maybe you could keep 3 reps in the tank and still make progress. But I think there are people who are so into that science where they're just thinking, well, I'm just going to do 10 sets that are basically truly more like a 10 RAR, and they're not pushing themselves and they never really get anywhere. And then just like a general mindset. I mean, I don't want to be that bro that just says all you have to do is train hard and that's it. I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I also don't think that's necessarily the best for one's training longevity. I'm not going to sit here and say every set should be to failure at all. I'm sure you remember Dante Trudel and like DC training, right?
Right.
And that was like every set, rest, paused, all the way to failure with an intense stretch afterwards. And plenty of guys got huge doing that. But there's also plenty of guys who get really good results not training to failure all the time. And honestly, if you look at a lot of the pros, they're not taking every set to failure. But I think if you're talking more like the mentality, I do think that is kind of missing. And not that I was even around for like the old school bodybuilding days, but I do think it was kind of cool to see from like earlier on how some of these guys really trained, from Mensur to Platz to even like Ronnie Coleman. Like, not saying everybody should do that, but I think it was kind of like a cool thing to see those videos and everything.
Yeah, it was more their passion and their attack. I think one of the beautiful things about hypertrophy is that if you are in your lane and you are doing it with focus and passion, whatever that lane is, you're going to be successful. Like, I can do a 2-set per exercise protocol, or I can do a 10-set per exercise protocol. But if you lock into that lane and you do it appropriately and you make the adjustments, I think one of the beautiful things about training is that you can get a lot out of anything if you just adjust it right.
Yeah, no, I totally feel the same way on that. I don't even know if I have anything to add there. I think we're definitely on the same page.
No, it's just one of the things I like about training and putting together workouts is the flexibility, as long as you do it right. It's just like different types of cars. You can drag race any type of car. It's just about making the adjustments. One final point on the training to failure, I kind of get, one thing that's always lost when we talk about training to failure is the fact that the demands of every exercise are different. Like, you can train to failure on a pendlay row or a barbell row, and all you do is lose a little bit of speed, right? There's no inherent punishment. And on a bench press, you can train to failure, and it's not exceptionally punishing. I find training to failure on a bicep curl far more punishing than I do a bench. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just my limb lengths and leverages, and I don't know, the tendons. I don't know. I would much rather train to failure on a pendlay row than a barbell curl.
And that not from an injury standpoint, or just overall stress?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot of compounds I'd never train to failure, but I guess my overarching point was, like, every exercise is different. So when you had guys like Dante, saying train to failure, like, train to failure on RDL is going to kill you in the long run. But like on like a pendlay row, it's your speed just slows. You lose kind of your. It's not as punishing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I actually think rows in general are an exercise that people can train pretty hard. This was an issue I had, remember, in high school, posting a video, and it was to failure. But the problem was, with a row, you're so much stronger at the start than at the end. So if I wanted to have every rep have this perfect contraction to my navel, then I had to use this light weight, which made 80% of the rep pretty easy. And so you look at the video and it's like, this looks easy, but it's like, no, that last bit. So I think with rows, whether it's using a little bit of like momentum towards the very end, or what's been talked about a lot more now is these kind of like lengthened partials where maybe you're just doing the last few reps as a partial, not to get into all that as a new topic, but just to say that I do think there are certain exercises that are more amenable to going to failure, or including maybe some intensifying techniques at the end, versus some I would just really stay away from that.
Just a real quick question to end. Did you happen to watch the whole Dr. Mike Lyle exchange during the pandemic?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Well, did you find it as entertaining as I did, or were you getting a little bit over it?
Yeah. Well, Lyle clearly has some legitimate issues, and I'm not even trying to hate on the guy. I mean, he's brought it out publicly several times that he has he's bipolar, and he's I don't know, I think he was medicated, and maybe he was off the medication. So and Mike is certainly somebody who enjoys arguments and whatnot. So I think you get those two together, and it can lead to some entertainment, I guess you could call it, and some I don't know, some debacles in the industry. But I don't think either of them are like inherently bad guys. I think they just are not one to back down from the other.
Yeah, Lyle has a lot. If anything, with Lyle, he has a lot to contribute. I wish he would contribute more. Sometimes I check his YouTube and there's nothing for 6 months, and then he gets pissed with Dr. Mike and he makes a video every 3 hours.
Right. I'm not sure. Is Lyle still active much?
He posts some random stuff on Instagram. It's just silliness about his dogs and stuff like that.
Right.
But nothing major. So, Dave, I appreciate you joining me. It's always a pleasure to get anybody on to talk lifting for an hour. And I sincerely appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule just to talk lifting. Before we go again, can you remind everybody where they can find you on the YouTubes and on social media?
Sure. So YouTube is Brains and Gains Podcast, and I'm also on the website, brainsandgainspodcast.com. Instagram is Dave_McConey, and that's pretty much everywhere you can find me.
All right, Dave, thanks. And hopefully we can do this again sometime in the future, and you have a good rest of your week.
All right, man. Great talking.